Hello family, welcome to Stories with Kelly. Please subscribe and leave a like for us. It means the world to us. Also share this video to your friends and loved ones and turn on post notifications so you don't miss future videos from us. Thank you. As you do so, sit back and relax as we dive into the story. She ran into her room and met Mrs. Clara's probing gaze. "Madam, what happened to you?" Mrs. Clara asked. "Nothing," Emily hastily answered before dashing into the bathroom to rid herself of her wet clothes. When she was done drying up, she changed into a new set of clothes and went into the kitchen to prepare dinner. Suddenly, the door opened, and Mr. Thomas was standing there, his eyes more threatening than ever. He angrily threw a report at her, his bloodshot eyes shooting daggers. "Is this why you wanted to divorce so badly, you despicable thing? How dare you?" he shouted. She stared at him in shock, wondering what he was talking about. "Did you think I would never find out that you're pregnant?" he continued. Before she could open her mouth to speak, he strode over to her. Shaking in fear, she felt a slap land hard across her cheek. "You are not just a gold digger, you're a, too," he fired. Tears began to stream down her face as she thought of the trouble she was in with the news of her pregnancy. "Speak up. Whose child are you carrying?" he demanded. Emily felt her body grow cold with fear, and she began to tremble all over. I don't know," she stuttered. "I won't repeat this question again, and trust me, if I don't get the answer I seek, you will be blamed for whatever happens to you. For the last time, who is responsible for your pregnancy?" he shouted. It was true that she had never been with any man before him, and she couldn't remember sleeping with him either. "I haven't been with anyone since I came into this house," she said, scared he wouldn't believe her if she told him she was still a virgin. Mr. Thomas's anger surged even more. He grabbed her neck and began to squeeze it until she cried out for help. "What other lies do you have up your sleeve? You can't think I'm responsible for your pregnancy," he snapped. Emily turned her head away, unable to meet his gaze. She was sure his eyes alone could kill her. The pressure of his hand on her neck increased, and soon she saw herself running out of air. Her face turned red from lack of oxygen, and a feeble hand clung to him in pain. "Please, let me go," she pleaded. Mr. Thomas gritted his teeth. "Are you going to tell me or not?" What could she say? She couldn't think of anything to pacify him. "I will tell you. Just let go first," she stammered. He stilled his hold on her neck, waiting for her to speak, his eyes growing impatient. "It's Kennedy's, right?" he accused. She shook her head in response. She couldn't agree to an obvious lie just to be set free from him. Tears glistened in her eyes, and her hands shook in fear. "Then who is it?" he demanded. "I don't know," she cried. Just when she thought she couldn't take it anymore, he finally let go. Emily fell to the ground, gasping for air. The sudden relief made her understand the importance of life. "If you refuse to speak up, I will go about it my own way," he threatened. He immediately sent for Kennedy, who was oblivious to what he had gotten himself into, and rushed in almost immediately. Kennedy was taken aback by the scene before him. His elder brother was standing above Emily with a very mean look that sent Kennedy shivering like never before. As soon as Mr. Thomas saw him, he handed him a piece of paper. Kennedy was left wondering what the paper was about. He took a quick glance at it and was about to return it to Mr. Thomas when his eyes caught sight of the hospital name and the name boldly written on it. What did it have to do with him? Why was his brother giving it to him? He was even more shocked when he turned the document over and saw that it was Emily's pregnancy test result, and it was positive. "Wow! Sister-in-law is pregnant," he announced excitedly, as if the others were unaware of the truth. As the words left his mouth, he immediately regretted it. Mr. Thomas's anger surged to the top in an instant. Suddenly, Kennedy felt a heavy slap land on his face, leaving him totally dazed. "Why did you hit me?" Tell me, are you responsible for the pregnancy? Mr. Thomas shouted. Kennedy stared at him in shock. I swear I don't know what you're talking about. I do not. Before he could finish the sentence, another slap landed on his cheek. He clutched at his cheek, moving backward to avoid getting hit again. Brother, believe me, I have never touched sister-in-law. Kennedy pleaded. Mr. Thomas rolled his eyes in disgust at the thought of his brother touching Emily. If the baby isn't yours, then whose is it? He demanded. Kennedy stared at him in shock. Brother, isn't the pregnancy yours? I thought you— Oh, shut up. Mr. Thomas snapped, cutting him off. Does it mean sister-in-law had an affair while in this house? Kennedy asked, but instead of responding, Mr. Thomas threw him a disdainful look before strutting out of the room, leaving Kennedy gaping at the sorrowful Emily, who was sprawled on the floor in pain. Immediately after Mr. Thomas left, Kennedy approached Emily and gave her a sly smile. I should have known that you would frame me with your pregnancy. Attempting to seduce me wasn't enough, you even got pregnant with another man's child. How shameless of you. Emily pretended not to hear him. Kennedy became enraged with her calmness, and as he attempted to pull her up and teach her a lesson, he was suddenly stopped by an angry voice at the door. Let her go this minute, the voice barked. Meanwhile, Mr. Thomas locked himself in his study to avoid doing something terrible to Emily. From the fear on his brother's face, he could tell that Kennedy was not responsible for the pregnancy. Kennedy was a coward who would chicken out in the face of trouble. He was supposed to be happy that his prayers had been answered and Emily was finally getting thrown out of his house, but he didn't feel happy at all. It felt as if he had been stabbed in the chest, and the pain was excruciating. He couldn't believe that the woman he had thought was innocent was sleeping with another man while in his house. He wouldn't wait until his father returned before doing the needful, but before then, he would find out who the man was and make sure he was dealt with. In the kitchen, Emily couldn't believe her eyes. Mr. Thomas's father was standing at the door with an expression she had never seen before. She had seen him angry at Mr. Thomas a couple of times, but never so furious at someone like he was with Kennedy at the moment. How dare you lay your filthy hands on her? Mr. E asked, his voice trembling with anger. Emily stole a look at Kennedy, who seemed to be shaking in fear. Father, when did you come back? Kennedy asked. Mr. E ignored him and rushed to help Emily to her feet. Kennedy saw the opportunity to escape, but as he made to leave the room, he was dragged back by two guards who pushed him roughly to the floor where Mr. E stood holding Emily. Take him away and have him punished thoroughly for messing with my daughter-in-law. And as for Thomas, he better have a good explanation for the stories I'm hearing. And what did you hear? Mr. Thomas's voice interrupted. He had changed into simple houseware and reeked terribly of alcohol. Mr. Thomas was definitely shocked to see his father, and he was even more stunned to witness the guards leading his younger brother away. His father, cradling Emily with one hand, approached Mr. Thomas and delivered a stinging slap across his face. I wasn't joking when I said I would hurt anyone who harms Emily. Mr. E sneered. Mr. Thomas was dumbfounded. His father had never laid a hand on him before. What did he mean by he would hurt anyone who hurt Emily? Mr. Thomas hadn't even been in the room with Emily when his father arrived, so how did he know he was the reason behind her tears? Father, you dare to slap me because of this woman? Mr. Thomas exclaimed incredulously. His father eyed him with disdain before leading the way to the sitting room. Mr. Thomas was furious at his father, but even more so at Emily for turning his father against him. He hoped his father would apologize once he heard about her supposed escapades with other men. He waited until his father had taken a seat before settling in another seat far opposite his father's and Emily's. I had to suspend my trip after I got the news of pregnancy. I knew you would be furious, so I decided to return home before you did something stupid. Mr. E began, peering at Mr. Thomas's angry face. I have been aware of everything going on from day one, but I was hoping you would come to love her and adore her as you should." Mr. Thomas recoiled in anger at the mention of love. He would never love someone like her, not even in his next life. "I know you've already made your conclusions, and I don't blame you for it, but I also know you've been treating her like a maid, making her do all your chores when we have plenty of staff in this house. Isn't she worse than a maid?" Mr. Thomas sneered, but his father immediately rewarded him with an icy gaze. "If you utter another word against her, you will regret what befalls you," Mr. E warned. Her eyes were already closing on the sofa where she sat with Mr. E when she suddenly felt a sharp pain in her lower abdomen and screamed out in agony. Mr. E grew terrified and alerted the guards, who rushed her to the hospital, the same hospital where Jade was being treated. After running a check on her, the doctor confirmed that it was nothing serious. Mr. E wasn't convinced. He was scared something bad might have happened to the baby because of the strenuous chores his son had made her do. "What about the baby, doctor? Is the baby okay?" he asked anxiously. "The baby is fine too. She just needs to rest more," the doctor assured him. Mr. E shot an angry gaze at his son. It was all Mr. Thomas's fault that she was in such a condition when she needed to be taken care of the most. Emily was discharged the same day, and following Mr. E's instructions, she was led into the master bedroom instead of the usual maid's quarters. Mr. Thomas was grumpy with the decision. He couldn't stand her presence, let alone having her in his room, in his bed. That night, after bathing, she wore her usual pink nightwear and settled at the far end of the bed. She didn't want to aggravate him more than his father had already done. Mr. Thomas was not in the room at the moment, but just before she could doze off, she suddenly heard the door open, and his presence filled the room. She forced her eyes shut, but no matter how much she tried, she found it difficult to sleep. She couldn't tell why, but a part of her finally concluded that it was because she was not used to the room. He had stayed away from the room from the minute his father forced her into his space. He had thought of sleeping in one of their numerous guest homes, but that would only make his father more pissed at him. He waited until he was sure she had fallen asleep before returning to the room. The room was dimly lit when he walked in. Apparently, she had turned off the lights, leaving only the table lamp beside the bedstand on. He took in her still form and wondered if she was fast asleep or pretending to be. Suddenly, he heard a soft squirm from her side. At first, he thought he had heard incorrectly, but when he heard it a second time, he decided to check on her, against his earlier wish not to ever touch her. As he touched her, she jerked up in fear, and he had to hold her down to prevent her from falling off the bed. He didn't realize they were in an awkward position until he felt her hand on his neck and the other on his waist. He stared at her and noticed that she was fast asleep on his body. What the heck? What had he gotten himself into? He tried to disengage himself from her but realized he wouldn't be able to do so without waking her up, which he didn't want to do. He carefully laid her down on the bed and lay beside her, still cradling her. Her head was now resting on the crook of his shoulder, and she was sleeping peacefully. Soon he could hear the sound of her soft snores on his chest. When he tried to disengage from her, she snorted and clung tighter to him. He finally gave up and lay beside her until he dozed off. It was morning already, she could tell by the bright sunlight streaming through the window. It had been a while since she woke up feeling so refreshed. As she attempted to stand up, she suddenly noticed a firm hand grasping her waist, and she couldn't move no matter how hard she tried. She grew terrified and pushed at the hand, but it didn't budge, nor did its owner. A look of shock crossed her face. Why on earth was Mr. Thomas holding her? He had loathed the idea of sharing a room with her, and now he was holding her like they were some kind of intimate lovers. She was still processing the situation when the figure beside her shifted, and his hand on her waist became loose. She took advantage of the release and immediately rolled off the bed, but not before he pulled her back, his figure towering over hers. "Let me go," she pleaded. He shot her a disdainful look. "Isn't this what you've always wanted?" What was he saying? Before she could utter a word, his lips clamped down on hers, and he suckled on her lips as if his life depended on it. She had always wanted to get intimate with her husband, but not this way, and not while he was angry at her. She tried to push him off, but her struggle only intensified his grip on her. When she saw that he wasn't letting go, she stopped struggling and stayed still under him. But instead of continuing, Mr. Thomas suddenly stopped, his face now filled with repulsion rather than desire. He pushed her until she landed on the floor with a thud. She scrambled to her feet and dashed into the restroom to wash up. In her haste, she had forgotten to take a change of clothes. After bathing, she peeped through a hole in the bathroom door. When she saw that he wasn't in the room, she decided to run in and pick up her clothes, but just as she entered the bedroom, the entrance door swung open and Mr. Thomas was standing there, shock visibly written on his face. Was she trying to seduce him? He brushed past her shaky form and went into his study without sparing her a glance. No matter how much he tried to concentrate, he found it difficult. His mind was clouded with images of her from the room. He had bedded many women in the past, but had never gotten worked up over any of them. In fact, he had never bedded a woman more than once. He always got tired of them after the first night. He finally decided to push the thoughts away and concentrate on his work. Suddenly, he heard a knock on the door. He knew it wasn't any of the servants. They wouldn't dare disturb him when he was in his study. "Come in," he muttered. The door slowly opened, and Emily was standing there, her dress unzipped. She pleaded with him to help her with it. At first, he wanted to ignore her, but when he saw that she wasn't going to leave him alone, he reluctantly stood up and began to zip up the dress. As his fingers grazed her bare skin, he sucked in his breath, hoping she wouldn't notice his reaction. When he was done, she thanked him and left for the room, not before telling him that breakfast was ready and he was needed downstairs by his father. As he descended the staircase, his eyes caught sight of Emily sitting beside his seat. He knew his father had instructed her to sit there. He forced a smile and politely greeted his father, who seemed to be smiling for the first time since returning from his trip. "Hope you slept well," his father muttered. He wanted to tell him that his night was ruined by the woman he sent into his room and the drama she pulled, but on second thought, he decided it would only ruin his father's mood. Kennedy was seated at the far end of the dining room, munching his food. He muttered his greetings before continuing his meal. There were faint scratches on his face, and he looked like he had been given a good beating. Immediately Mr. Thomas sat down, his eyes went straight to Emily's swollen lips. He had never looked at her lips before, but as he did, he regretted it. He could still remember the lingering taste of her lips and how they submitted under his. "I have a confession to make," Mr. E began, startling them. The trio looked up at him in shock, wondering what the confession was about. "Thomas, my son, I want you to know that the baby Emily is carrying is yours," Mr. E continued. "Did he have to bring the pregnancy up?" Mr. Thomas thought he had expected something very important. He stared at them for a while before continuing. "The night Emily was brought into the house, I was scared that you wouldn't recover, so I had one of the best doctors in town sedate Emily and had your sperm injected into her." Their mouths dropped open in shock, and they stared at their father as if he were a stranger. As for Emily, her hands were on her lips, and she was sobbing. She had been enduring all the pain and hardship inflicted on her by her husband because he believed she had cheated, when all along the pregnancy was his. Mr. E left his seat and went to console her. "It's okay, Emily. I promise no one will ever mistreat you again." Mr. Thomas couldn't take it anymore. He slammed his fist on the table in anger before storming out of the dining room. Emily's POV, after the meal, she decided to go see Mrs. Clara. She knew the elderly woman would be sick with worry since she hadn't seen her since returning from the hospital. "Young madam, where have you been?" Mrs. Clara exclaimed. Emily told her everything that had happened, from when she returned from the hospital to when she was asked by Mr. Thomas's father to share his room with him. Mrs. Clara was ecstatic with joy. "I hope the young master comes to love you like his beloved wife," she muttered, enveloping Emily in a tight hug. "You really deserve all the happiness you can get." Emily returned to the room to find her husband only in his briefs. From the lingering cologne, she was sure he was getting ready to go out. "Dad wants you to accompany me to a dinner party, so go and get ready," Mr. Thomas announced. Emily couldn't believe her ears. Was he really asking her to follow him out? She brushed past him and went into the dressing room. Her clothes might be cheap, as he once accused, but they were still beautiful, and she knew she could still turn heads while wearing them. She settled for a simple floral red gown with a thigh-high slit and picked black stilettos to go with it. After dressing up, she pulled her hair into a simple bun and placed pieces of rose petals on it. She stared at the mirror and blinked twice with satisfaction. The figure standing before her was that of a dashing young lady. She didn't know what to expect from Mr. Thomas. Would he compliment her dressing or tease her for wearing worthless clothes and jewelry? Pushing the door open, she slowly made her way into the room and sat on the large bed. Mr. Thomas's shoes for the occasion were laid out beside the bed. After what seemed like an eternity, he walked into the room. Emily could swear that her husband was the hottest man she had ever laid eyes on. He was clad in a black suit with a matching tuxedo, his hair neatly combed to the left side, giving him a boyish look. She smiled to herself at the direction her thoughts were heading. "Why are you smiling?" Mr. Thomas asked. She had thought she was fast enough, but apparently her husband had seen her before she wiped the smile off her face. "Nothing. Just remembered something," she replied. He was expecting to see the ordinary girl he despised, but instead he saw an astonishing woman. She looked so beautiful and classy that he had to restrain himself from taking her into his arms. He quickly scolded himself for imagining such a thing about her. At the party, Mr. Thomas refrained from introducing Emily to any of his friends. Although most of them knew he was married, they also knew how much he loathed his wife and how he would never bring her to any occasion he was invited to. But as they walked in, he noticed the way the men had their eyes on her, as if they wanted to undress her with their gaze. It made him angry and uncomfortable at the same time. He didn't care about her, but he couldn't stand the thought of another man having her either. He distanced himself from her and made her sit alone while he busied himself with some classy girls who were swooning around him since he walked into the party. All the while, his mind kept drifting to where Emily sat. She was no longer alone, she was now in the company of a young guy, and he seemed to be cracking her up with whatever he was telling her. Mr. Thomas felt something in him squeezing, anger. She had never laughed at anything he said, but here she was, shamelessly laughing at a total stranger's joke. Unable to stand the duo, he stood up from his seat and marched to where she was. Emily was shocked to see him and immediately stood up to meet him. Even in the dim light, she could make out the bloodshot stare he was shooting at her. "Who is he?" he bellowed. She stared at him in fear, hoping he would calm down without creating a scene. "He was just keeping me company," she pleaded. Not satisfied with her response, he roughly pulled her out of the place and into the car. "Since you can't respect simple orders, you will stay in this car alone until the party is over." She didn't want to argue with him. She was even grateful she would lie down and sleep while waiting for him. When Mr. Thomas saw that she wasn't arguing with him, he locked the door. Just as he was about to leave, he saw the same guy coming toward them. He might flirt with her while she's in the car, he thought, and made up his mind to stay in the car with her until the party was over. She expected him to return to the party, but here he was, back inside the car. Did he change his mind? She stole a glance at his expressionless face, but couldn't make out what he was thinking. Suddenly, his hands reached for her face, and he pressed his lips down on hers. This time, it was less demanding, and his grip on her wasn't as firm as before. She had wanted to push him away, but suddenly her hand strayed to his neck and held him, urging him on. He deepened the kiss, his hands caressing her lower back, sending shivers down her spine. What was she doing? She couldn't possibly be giving in to a man who treated her so badly. She tried to push him away, but he was stronger, and with his body looming over hers, it was difficult to do anything. She relaxed, hoping he would release her like he did the last time, but instead of pushing her off, he began to nibble her neck. He started with tiny bites until she grew feverish with need. She brought her hands back to his neck and straddled him. He moaned into her ear before slowly releasing her. She was disappointed. Did she do something wrong? Why was he leaving her after turning her on? She looked so beautiful and classy that he had to restrain himself from taking her into his arms. He quickly scolded himself for imagining such a thing about her. Mr. Thomas hooked their seat belts and turned on the ignition. He couldn't explain what had gotten over him. If he hadn't controlled himself, he was sure he would have had her right there in the car. They drove in silence until they arrived home. She waited until he had gotten out of the car before following suit. If she did something to infuriate him, she might as well stay away from him to avoid aggravating him further. She slowly made her way to Mrs. Clara's room and knocked on the elderly woman's door. "Young madam, are you okay? Did you quarrel with the boss again?" Mrs. Clara asked, shocked to see her. After narrating what happened at the party, the elderly woman smiled. "I think the boss has fallen for you already. He's only being overprotective of what is his," she taunted. The elderly woman advised her on what to do and asked her to go back to her husband, even though Emily insisted on passing the night in her room. Mr. Thomas was sleeping on the bed when she walked in, his chest bare and only in his pajama pants. She changed into her nightwear and went to her corner of the bed. Just as her back touched the bed, Mr. Thomas's eyes slowly opened. "Where did you go?" he asked. I went to see Mrs. Clara," she stuttered. Mr. Thomas rolled his eyes at her. "Go to sleep," he sneered. She didn't want to sleep, she was no longer sleepy. She pretended to sleep while Mr. Thomas stared down at her in anger. Why did he want her to sleep when she wasn't tired? She watched as he drifted off, and out of curiosity, she strayed her hands to his bare chest. He looked so peaceful when he was asleep, she thought, as her exploration continued. At first, he showed no reaction, but after a while, he pulled her hands off his body and pushed her down until she was under him. "Let me show you how it's done," he whispered in a husky tone. He kissed her softly on the lips, and when she didn't struggle, he deepened the kiss. His hands caressed her body through the opening of her nightgown. She stiffened and clung tighter to him. Then he pulled away and stared at her flushed face and swollen lips. He was enjoying her responses to his touches. He was eager to explore her body further but felt he needed her permission first. "Do you want me to continue?" he asked. She nodded, and he gave her a wicked grin. His hand went for her gown, and he carefully pulled it over her body, leaving her exposed skin to his view. She was beautifully attractive with flawless skin. He released a gasp as she tried to cover her body in shyness. He smiled at her, then pulled her hands away. "I want to see you," he said. She relaxed under his gaze. His hand circled her mounds, and she rewarded him with a moan. Suddenly, Emily screamed, "I don't want this." Mr. Thomas's eyes grew wide with shock. She had granted him permission a few minutes ago. Why was she suddenly changing her mind? He stared down at the bulge between his legs and winced in obvious anger. Was she so insensitive not to consider him? Unable to do anything further, he went for a cold shower. When he returned, she was already fast asleep. He sighed and lay down beside her, careful not to touch her, all the while cursing her for playing with his emotions. She could have stopped him before he got aroused. The next morning, he woke up to see that her side of the bed was empty. She could be wherever she wanted, he didn't care anymore. She had caused him enough pain already. As he prepared to have a quick shower before heading to work, he heard a knock on the door. "Sir, your father demands your presence downstairs," came the servant's voice. What did his father want from him again? He had done his part by accepting Emily against his will. He pulled a shirt over his body before strutting down the stairs to see his father. Mr. E was dressed in a brown suit with a wide grin on his face. "Son, I was wondering if you would be free to accompany me to a fundraising event," he said. Mr. Thomas was about to accept until he heard his father say, "Alongside your wife." His face creased into a frown at the thought of stepping out with Emily. The last time he went out with her, it was a total disaster. "Dad, I need to be at the office before noon. I'm sure the meeting can be postponed. Call your personal assistant and have her reschedule it." That was it, his dad wasn't going to change his mind for any reason. He immediately excused himself to get ready. Emily was inside the dressing room when he returned. She was clad in a simple floral gown that stopped right at her knees, her hair down, giving her an air of aloofness. She also had simple makeup on her face. "I was wondering where you were," she started upon seeing him. "Your dad was asking for you." Mr. Thomas spared her a glance before walking into the bathroom to have his bath. She was such a good actress for putting on such a show after messing up with him last night. He would make sure to pay her back in her own coin. The E family arrived at the event looking as intimidating as ever. Most of the attendants had their eyes on Emily. It seemed it was her first public appearance. Just like at the party, most of the men were staring at her in a way he found disturbing, but before he knew it, he was offering her his arm and holding firmly to hers. She had expected him to leave her alone like he did the last time. She had prepared to keep herself busy on her phone during the function, but with the way her husband stood beside her, it almost made it impossible to move to any part of the venue without him accompanying her. The feeling of being around him was both sweet and strange. She liked the attention, but also loved the fact that he wasn't willing to admit his growing emotions for her. She could tell he was clearly falling for her. She saw it in the way he stared at her and his overprotective nature. Mrs. Clara had told her that men only protect what they cherish. When Mr. E was called to make the opening remark, she was shocked when he called out her name and dedicated the fundraising speech to her sick brother. How did he know? She was sure she hadn't told him about it. She waited until he was done before rushing to meet him. "Sir, how did you know that?" "Oh, you mean your brother? Well, you could thank your husband for it. He told me about Jade." Mr. E replied. Tears glistened in her eyes as she looked at her rigid husband with gratitude. She had never expected someone so mean to have human emotions. She wanted to hug him and thank him for considering her brother, but she was scared he would push her away if she dared. After the occasion, just as they made for their car, she was shocked to see the faces standing beside her with their heads bent in shame. "Emily, we are truly sorry for hurting you," came the voice of her father. He was sitting in a wheelchair, looking haggard in his appearance. She ignored them and opened the car door, but was restrained by her father-in-law. "Emily, my dear, you need to hear them out, please." She pulled herself together as she stared at the faces of the people who betrayed her and sold her to the E family. "What do you want?" she forced herself to ask. Her stepmother was the first to speak up. She didn't look her usual sophisticated self and appeared a bit slimmer. "Emily, please forgive us." What was she saying? Why would they want her forgiveness after hurting her so badly? Did they suddenly remember her after hearing she was pregnant with Mr. Thomas's child? Did they even care to visit her when she was suffering in the hands of her supposed husband? She looked away, wiping her tear-filled eyes. "You treated me like I was nobody. You even sold me and yet never bothered to pay for my brother's hospital bills. How on earth am I supposed to forgive you? He was already growing impatient with the delay. He had a meeting to attend, and Emily and her gold-digging family were wasting his time. He looked at his father, who silently pleaded with him to wait a little longer. To avoid getting pissed, he excused himself to talk with a lady he had noticed staring at him during the function. She was a very pretty lady with a curvy body. He knew he wasn't going to enjoy whatever the lady was going to say, but he had to spare her the opportunity to distract himself from getting totally worked up. As they chatted and laughed, he suddenly noticed Emily's eyes on him. Even though she was talking with her family, her gaze seemed fixed on him. Was she getting jealous? She couldn't possibly be, he thought. She hated him, and the feeling was mutual. On their way home, he kept stealing glances at Emily. Her face was expressionless, and she didn't bother to look at him like she did in the past. He somehow wished she would look at him, maybe scold him for talking to another woman, but she did none of that. As for his father, he didn't look the least bit pleased. They drove in silence until they arrived at the office. He wanted to just step down while the driver took his father and Emily home, but as he clambered down, he saw Emily and his father following suit. Midway through the office, his father patted him on the back. "Son, I want Emily to see the office today," he said. Mr. Thomas nodded as the elevator doors opened, and they marched into his office. Thankfully, the meeting was a lengthy one, and he didn't have to be in his office all day staring at Emily. When he was done, he met Emily lying on the sofa in his office, fast asleep. Her hair was down, some strands sticking into her eyes. On impulse, he went closer and pushed the unruly strands of hair back. As he did, his fingers brushed her face, and her eyes immediately flew open. "So sorry," he stuttered. "Your hair was sticking into your eyes." "Thanks," she muttered and turned over to continue her sleep, but sleep was already gone from her eyes. She took a peek at her wristwatch and saw that it was already past lunchtime. She had surely overslept in her husband's office. She stifled a yawn as she sat up on the sofa. Mr. Thomas was staring at her, wondering what she was up to. When he saw her yawn, he figured she was hungry and immediately asked his assistant to get her some food. He saw the way she opened her mouth in shock when the food was brought to her. She muttered a thank you before feasting on the meal. After eating, he decided to take her around the office, but as soon as they stepped out the door, she missed a step, and he had to catch her. Her hands were curled around his neck as he steadied her. He could tell she was still weak, so he called his driver and asked him to take her home, but she insisted on going with him. "I still have things to attend to in the office. I can't go home now," she pouted, clinging to him. He had no choice but to follow her home. He had to carry her bridal style into the car and made her lie on his body inside. He was hoping she would fall asleep once they got home, but instead of sleeping, she clung to his arm while on the bed. What had he gotten himself into? Emily was beginning to bring out the weak and emotional side of him. He would never follow a woman's orders, not even his mother dared to control him, but here he was, doing Emily's bidding. As if she heard his thoughts, she turned and cradled his cheek in her arms. Before he knew what was happening, she was kissing him with reckless abandon. What was wrong with her? Was she on something? All of a sudden, he made to extract his lips from hers, but she bit down on his lip in a way he found very amusing. Was she teasing him like he did to her? He was fighting not to be led on by her like last time. She probably wanted to tease him and leave him hanging, but as he made to push her off, he suddenly heard her plea. "Thomas, make love to me." Mr. Thomas wondered if this was another one of Emily's schemes to trap him like she had done the last time. If that was the case, she could forget about it. He wasn't going to fall for her game again. As he turned his gaze away from her, he felt a painful tension between his legs, his groin was tight, and he didn't understand why. Emily was beautiful, but he had other stunning women at his disposal, ready to do anything to be in his bed. As he struggled to free himself from her hold, she reluctantly let go of his hand and turned her back on him. A pang of pity suddenly struck him. It seemed like she wasn't playing a game this time. The woman before him genuinely seemed to want him to make love to her. Making room for her in the bed was perhaps one of the biggest mistakes he had ever made. Immediately after leaning in and feeling her body again against his, all of his resolve crumbled, and the self-control he had built up vanished. Emily shivered with desire as he stroked her body, the same body he had gotten lost in the first time he was tempted to make love to her. "Emily, are you sure you want this?" he asked, knowing it was a foolish question the moment he spoke it. Emily's response was clear. She moved closer to him, wrapping her arms around his neck. Mr. Thomas buried his head between her breasts, breathing in her familiar scent. This was no coincidence. Emily was indeed the woman who had saved him from a brutal man the same day he had his accident. Regret suddenly washed over him. He had mistreated this woman all this time, even though she deserved none of the ill treatment he had inflicted upon her. He paused to look into her eyes. "Do you remember the night you were almost assaulted by a man a few years ago?" he asked softly. Emily nodded, and then a sudden realization hit her. "It was you. You're the one who saved me." Mr. Thomas nodded and enveloped her in a tight embrace. "Emily, I'm sorry for everything I put you through. Will you ever forgive me?" Emily smiled at him. "I've already forgiven you. Otherwise, I would never have offered you something so precious to me." Mr. Thomas looked at her, suddenly speechless. He was surprised when he realized that Emily had never experienced anything this intimate before. She blushed, hiding her face shyly, and then nodded. She smelled like heaven, and Mr. Thomas was almost tempted to undress her in that moment and take her without restraint. "Are you sure you really want me to do this?" he asked again, seeking confirmation. Emily only smiled in response, encouraging him to continue exploring her body. Mr. Thomas got up from the bed, and she let out a small sound of disagreement. "Calm down," he said reassuringly, trying to find a way to protect both of them. Emily rolled her eyes, looking at him with desire. He took a condom from his back pocket and quickly put it on. He watched her eyes widen in surprise at his size, a look he was used to. He slid back into the bed, kissed her passionately, and began working his magic on her breasts. Emily arched her back as he moved away from her lips to feast on the tender flesh of her chest. Her soft moans encouraged him to continue. Mr. Thomas quickly removed the last piece of fabric covering her skin, leaving her naked before him. Her breathing became erratic. Emily noticed and smiled joyfully. Why are you shocked?" "You said you'd seen plenty of naked women before," she teased. Mr. Thomas couldn't admit that it was a lie. He had slept with many women, but none of them had made him feel like this. In that moment, a wave of jealousy washed over him at the thought of another man seeing her in this splendor. "I want to be your last," he murmured, drawing his face closer to her thigh. Emily tightened her thighs, almost denying him access, but he quickly won the battle, gently parting her legs. When his tongue touched her clitoris, she jolted violently, overwhelmed by a fresh wave of pleasure. "Stop torturing me," she begged. "Not yet, darling," he responded softly, covering her body with kisses. Her cries of pleasure and soft moans rewarded him for his exploration. Mr. Thomas did everything he could to stop himself from taking her like an animal in heat. She seemed so fragile, and he didn't want to hurt her. He wanted to take his time. It was her first time, and he wanted this moment to be unforgettable for her. After finishing with his tongue, he slowly slid a finger into her opening. She climbed in pain before another wave of pleasure overtook her, and she arched her back to welcome a second finger. Emily gasped, her eyes closed. Mr. Thomas watched her reach climax under his fingers before positioning himself over her, placing his manhood at the entrance of her body. As soon as the tip touched her, she arched toward him and took him in entirely. He had planned to take his time, but her body seemed eager to be fulfilled. He grabbed her waist to stabilize her as he pushed deeper. Her eyes were closed, and she gritted her teeth, a look he found very seductive. He wanted to increase the pace, but he wasn't sure if she was ready until she asked him to go faster. Mr. Thomas changed position, kneeling on one knee before taking her from behind. As she screamed in pleasure, he muffled her cries with his hand, aware that the house wasn't soundproof. "Take it slow," he murmured gently, placing his hand over her mouth to stifle her sounds. Mr. Thomas lightly spanked her, and she gasped loudly as she reached orgasm. She turned around and climbed on top of him, surprising him. "Are you sure you want another round?" he asked. "Of course," she replied, playing with his nipple. Mr. Thomas smiled at her innocence, mocking her slightly. "The way you mounted me made me think you were a pro," he teased. Emily blushed deeply and looked away. Mr. Thomas resumed his gentle movements, guiding her as she quickly learned to find her rhythm. She moved slowly at first, then increased her pace, whimpering and twisting her body seductively. She was a quick learner. When she grew tired, she gently collapsed on his body. Mr. Thomas chuckled softly before lifting her and carrying her to the bathroom for a shower. After lifting Emily and carrying her into the bathroom, Mr. Thomas carefully placed her under the hot water. They bathed together in comfortable silence. Emily, visibly shy, asked softly, "What do you think?" Mr. Thomas looked at her with an amused smile. He couldn't help but find her adorable in her awkwardness, especially after what they had just shared. She tried to cover her breasts with her hands, but Mr. Thomas burst into laughter, teasing her. "What exactly are you covering? You weren't this shy a few minutes ago," he remarked. Emily blushed immediately at his words, and the thought of her audacity made her smile despite herself. She sat facing him, trying to hide her embarrassment. Mr. Thomas looked at her with newfound tenderness, appreciating her naivety and innocence even after everything they had just experienced. "Tell me, was it my father who made you change your mind about me, or did it come from you?" Mr. Thomas asked, curious about what had suddenly made her so close to him. Emily bit her lip, hesitant, but finally answered with a mischievous smile. "From the first day I laid eyes on you unconscious in that room, I felt something for you," she finally admitted. Mr. Thomas blinked, surprised by her confession. He sank slowly into the water, his eyes never leaving Emily. "So, are you going to stand there all day asking questions, or are you going to join me?" he invited, making space for her in the bathtub. The offer was tempting, and Emily hesitated for a moment before sliding into the hot water next to him. The warmth of the water running down her bare skin and Mr. Thomas's gaze on her made her heart beat faster. Her head rested on Mr. Thomas's shoulder as his left hand gently explored Emily's body, caressing her skin with growing familiarity. Emily suddenly felt overwhelmed by a new kind of pleasure, a soft, painful tension that engulfed her as Mr. Thomas's touches became bolder. It was as if he knew every corner of her body, like he had always possessed her. At some point, he pulled away from her embrace and plunged his head underwater, causing ripples on the surface. Emily watched him with curiosity, unsure of what he was doing. She had thought they were merely there to bathe, but Mr. Thomas's response was entirely different. Underwater, he dove into her intimacy and began licking her with an expertise that sent waves of pleasure through her. She tried to suppress a cry of satisfaction, struggling to close her legs, but Mr. Thomas easily won the battle by lifting her legs, gaining complete access to her body. Emily twisted beneath him, her hands gripping Mr. Thomas's head as he continued his intimate caresses. She felt each movement of his tongue like a wave of heat spreading through her entire body. When Mr. Thomas finally surfaced, spitting out water, his eyes were slightly red from the time spent underwater. Emily let out a sigh of relief, water running down her skin as the marks of Mr. Thomas's lips remained visible on her. That night, Emily slept better than she had in a long time. Mr. Thomas's arms were wrapped around her as if afraid she might slip away while they slept. She felt safe in the warmth of his embrace. She knew she was supposed to be angry with him for everything he had put her through, but that anger seemed to have vanished. Seeing him sleep peacefully beside her made her realize just how attached she had grown to him despite everything. Mr. Thomas shifted slightly in his sleep and opened his eyes, looking at her as if he hadn't expected her to already be awake. "Good morning, darling," he murmured with a slight smile. Emily tried to pull away from him, still sensitive from the pains of the previous night. Mr. Thomas noticed her attempt to move away and teased her gently, grabbing her arm and pulling her back against him. "You're not trying to starve your husband, are you?" he joked with a laugh. "Shouldn't you be tired?" she asked, laughing as well. He pretended to pull her closer, but she pinched him playfully on the cheek before jumping out of bed. Of course, he was faster than her, and before she could even touch the floor, he grabbed her and brought her back to bed, pinning her under his body. "Thomas, my body is still sore," she murmured, wriggling under him. Mr. Thomas looked at her before bursting into laughter. "What were you thinking?" he asked, tracing lines on her lips with his fingers. "It wouldn't be good for the baby," she stammered, slightly embarrassed. Mr. Thomas laughed even harder. "Don't worry. Our little girl would appreciate the warmth coming from her father," he teased confidently. Emily smiled despite herself, amused by her husband's confidence. "So, what's it going to be?" Mr. Thomas asked, looking at her with tenderness. "Let me go," she pleaded softly, hoping he would give in. Before she could say another word, Mr. Thomas tilted his head toward her and captured her lips in a passionate kiss. This time, it wasn't a demanding kiss, but a soft, tender one. His lips seemed to fit perfectly with hers, and Emily felt a wave of desire surge through her. She wanted more. She suddenly found herself giving in to the heat rising within her, her body responding to every kiss. Suddenly, Mr. Thomas broke the kiss, a playful smile spreading across his lips. "You're not asking me to let you go anymore," he murmured, teasing her once again. This time, it was Emily's turn to get angry. She pushed him away forcefully and rolled out of bed, secretly hoping he would come after her, but he didn't. They were having breakfast when Emily suddenly received a call from the hospital. The doctor informed her that her brother wanted to see her. She quickly got up from the table, leaving her plate half full, and rushed to get dressed. She hadn't even bothered to tell Mr. Thomas, but as she made her way downstairs, she caught his worried gaze. "Did you plan on going to see your brother without me?" he asked, fixing his eyes on her. "Aren't you supposed to be at the office this morning?" she replied, trying to avoid his questions. Instead of answering, Mr. Thomas got up from his chair and followed her to the door. "I'll drive you," he said calmly but firmly. During the drive to the hospital, Emily tried to engage him in conversation, but Mr. Thomas ignored her almost entirely, turning away each time their eyes met. The silent treatment was already killing her inside. When they finally arrived at the hospital, she decided not to leave the car until she got a response from him. "Thomas, I'm sorry," she began, cupping his cheeks in her hands, hoping for a reaction. Mr. Thomas finally looked at her and smiled softly. "Say it again," he murmured, almost laughing. "Say what?" she asked, confused. "Call me a darling," he replied, teasing her as he leaned in closer. Emily smiled despite herself, a quick, sincere smile. "You're so cheap," she joked, making fun of him. Mr. Thomas leaned toward her, hooking his hand around her back, his lips just inches from hers. "Oh, really?" he murmured, his body almost fully leaning over hers. Emily shivered with desire, her hands wrapping around his neck, but instead of kissing her as she had hoped, he gazed deeply into her eyes before softly whispering, "We're both shameless people." Blushing with embarrassment, Emily gently pushed him away, trying to compose herself. When they arrived at the hospital, Emily noticed Jade sitting on his bed, but before she could say a word, he rushed toward Mr. Thomas and hugged him enthusiastically. She stood there, frozen, not understanding why her brother, whom she hadn't seen in days, was ignoring her to greet Mr. Thomas with such enthusiasm. Jade clung to Mr. Thomas's hand, barely giving her a glance, which left Emily even more confused. She looked back and forth between her brother and Mr. Thomas, who were completely engrossed in their own conversation as if she didn't exist. Mr. Thomas noticed her discomfort and motioned for her to come closer. Emily made her way toward them, but her face betrayed her confusion. "Can someone tell me what's going on here before I lose my patience?" she barked, unable to contain her frustration. Mr. Thomas detached himself and placed a reassuring hand on Emily's shoulder. "I guess I owe you an explanation," he began in a calm tone. "After the day I ran into you at the hospital, I wanted to learn more about Jade's condition and understand why he wasn't receiving the care he needed." He took a deep breath before continuing. "At first, I thought you were trying to sell your shares to run off with another man, but when I found out you were doing it to cover your brother's hospital bills, I decided to pay the bill myself. I asked the doctor not to tell you. Since that day, I've been visiting Jade 3 times a day to make sure he's doing well." He let out a light sigh before adding, "Please don't be mad at him for not telling you the truth. It was my idea to keep it a secret." Emily stood speechless, her heart heavy with confusion and gratitude. She had always believed Mr. Thomas was ruthless, incapable of showing the slightest bit of love or emotion, and yet he had cared for Jade, watching over her brother attentively. Tears began to stream down her cheeks as Jade rushed toward her, wrapping his arms around her. "Uncle Thomas told me you're expecting a little girl. He said I could be her big brother," he said. At those words, Emily smiled through her tears and wrapped her arms around the 2 men who had suddenly transformed her life. She didn't know how to express all the gratitude and love she felt in that moment. A few months later, Emily was in her room nursing their daughter, Amanda. Her husband, Mr. Thomas, suddenly entered the room with a frown on his face. "Is it normal to be jealous of your own baby?" he asked, a mix of amusement and worry in his voice. Emily looked up, confused. "Why do you say that?" With a mischievous glint in his eye, Mr. Thomas responded, "You haven't given me a single second since Amanda was born." Emily had expected him to be joking, but when she looked closer, she noticed that his smile had been replaced by a slight frown. He seemed genuinely upset. She carefully placed the baby in her crib and approached him. Mr. Thomas stood leaning against the wall, looking like a child who had been rejected. As Emily drew near, a smile spread across his lips, and he immediately scooped her up, placing her on his lap. He captured her lips in a passionate kiss, as if he couldn't wait any longer to reconnect with her intimately. She responded with equal fervor, realizing that she too had missed their closeness. She wasn't the only one who had felt the distance. The end. I hope you enjoyed the story of Emily and Mr. Thomas. If you did, you'll love this new story you see on your screen. It's 100 times more interesting and emotional than Emily and Mr. Thomas's. Click on the video, and we'll meet you there. Don't forget, we love you.